and welcome to day 2 of Eco Week 2024, and especially to our session of biodiversity and our forests. So my name is Antonia, and I am the Young Environmentalist Awards Project Officer, and I'm going to be your host for this morning's session. So just a little bit about ECO-UNESCO itself. So firstly, we were founded in 1986 by a group of young people, and our aim is to empower the young of today who are involved with us to help protect the environment. ECO-UNESCO is proud to be one of UNESCO's affiliated clubs and a Sustainable Development Goals ambassador. So that links in really well with our Eco Week because it's now also Sustainable Development Goals Week. And while you guys are in there, to kick us off, do you mind in the chat, so we can use a chat throughout the session, do you mind in the chat just letting us know where you are and then how many are in the classroom with you? So if you could just pop in, so depending on where you're coming from, different parts of Ireland, and let us know how many are in the classroom or are participating with you guys today. So today's session is all about biodiversity and our forests, and I'd love to introduce Pat Neville to you, who's going to take over in a sec. So he is from Coillte, and he'll be talking all things about biodiversity and our forests in line with the Sustainable Development Goal 15. So that's life on land. So you guys can see that image there with all the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So this one links in with that, and I am going to let Pat take over. So the floor is yours, Pat.
Thanks a million, Antonia, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me on. I'm going to talk to you today about Coillte, about forests, and about nature and wildlife. And I am going to talk to you a little bit. I'm going to mention UN Sustainable Development Goals in the presentation as well. I see Antonia has scribbled a circle around number 15, life and land, and maybe there might be one or two others that forests can help with. I have a ton of slides. I'm going to fly through them. If people have questions along the way, put them in the text box or the chat box or just shout. I'm very happy to take any questions as we go. And then we might have some questions at the end. So I'll see if I can share a screen now and get some slides up. I'll tell you a bit about myself, and then I will jump right into this presentation. So hopefully, Antonia, can you see that now? Is that coming up as a presentation?
We can see presenter view currently, so you might have to switch off presenter view. Yeah.
Okay, is it still there, presenter view?
Yeah.
Oh, yikes. Okay, here's where we'll need a bit of help, maybe.
You might just have to, if you X out of presenter view on your right top screen. Yeah, see if that works.
Ah, look at that. Let's see what happens again.
And then turn off presenter. Oh, yeah. Oh, let's see. Yeah,
let's see. How's that looking?
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you for the online help, Antonia. That's brilliant. My name is Pat Neville. I am communications manager for Coillte. I'll say a bit about that. Really briefly, I'm an ecologist myself by training. I studied in UCD, did a postgrad there, and then I worked briefly for the National Parks and Wildlife, and then I went to work for Coillte, and I've had a few different jobs. I helped Coillte with their forests and wildlife management, so managing forests for nature, their wildlife and nature conservation program. I helped with forest certification for a good few years, which has proven that our forests are well managed for nature, for people, and to make a profit as well from wood. I'll say a little bit about that. I worked in regulation, and then I kept telling people Irish forests have a good story to tell, and I said, well, put your money where your mouth is, Pat, and tell the story. So now I'm in communications. Today I'm going to talk to you guys about, or bear with me now, I'm going to talk to you guys about very quickly the history of forests in Ireland, a little bit about Coillte, who they are and what they do, and then Coillte have recently changed how we manage the forest. So we're interested to see what you think about that as well. We ask people what they want from the forest, and we'll tell you what we're trying to do. And then I'll finish by talking about forests and nature, really. Mostly about forests for nature, but a little bit about climate and wood as well. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So we all know the forests that we have today in Ireland. 10,000 years ago, Ireland was totally covered in ice. So we were like the Arctic or the Antarctic. So there was woolly mammoth living in Ireland. There was polar bear, there was great big brown bears. And the ice began to melt about 10,000 years ago, and the first forest began to appear in Ireland. And ecologists like to say that the trees that came to Ireland at that time are considered native trees, and everything else that came subsequently is considered non-native or introduced. So for about 4,000 or 5,000 years before humans came, Ireland was just on its own. Ice melted and the forests began to grow. And at this stage, interestingly, the great big peat bogs that we have in the Midlands and out the west of Ireland hadn't formed at that stage. So Irish forests were at their peak 6,000 years ago. They covered the entire of the country. They say that a squirrel could leave Dublin and travel to Galway or Donegal or Cork and not put her feet on the ground. There were so many trees. We had mega fauna then. We had giant elk. We had brown bear, we had wolves, we had eagles. So it's hard to imagine an Ireland like that, totally covered in forest. And then about 5,000 years ago, the first humans arrived in Ireland and forest cover began to go down from there on. And it, wait, no, we'll get there. Sorry, we'll get there now. That's it, yeah, it's me and technology, eh? But we're getting there. It's working. So forest cover began to go down slowly, but in the 18th and 19th centuries, with the Industrial Revolution and also the population of Ireland was much, much bigger than it is now. Forests were cleared for agriculture and industry, and we cleared them really, really well. So by the start of the 20th century, less than 1% of Ireland was under forest. So you can imagine nearly all of our forests are gone. There's a lovely picture in the hotel in Glendalough. People know Glendalough Valley with the round tower and all the trees. And the picture shows the valley. You can see the round tower, and there's not a single tree in that picture. It's a painting. So that was what the landscape looked like in Ireland. Almost no forests whatsoever. And the very few that remained were often in remote places. So in the early 1900s, the state commenced a tree planting program, and we started planting trees around the country. So today, that's 22, should be 24, about 11, and it's gone up a little bit since then, 11.4% of Ireland is now covered by trees. 70% of those are conifer trees, evergreen, and 30% are broadleaf. Those forests we have today, they support our animal and plant communities that we have, and they store about over 300 million tons of carbon. So, you know, trees are really good for storing carbon. They help with climate change, absorbing carbon dioxide, storing it in the wood and releasing oxygen back at the same time. So that's sort of where we are today. As well as that, with our forests, they provide over 3 million cubic meters of wood to build low carbon homes. They support about 9,000 jobs, all based in rural Ireland, really, not the big cities. And they're a really good place for people to enjoy nature. And we get about 29 million visits to Ireland's forests per year, public and private. So forests are doing a lot of things for us, not just for nature. They're helping us provide wood, they're helping us with climate, they're helping provide jobs, and they're great places to go and visit. I mean, who doesn't like a visit to a nice forest park? So who are Coillte and what do they do? We manage in Coillte over 440,000 hectares of forests, which is about 7% of the land cover in Ireland. It's in old money, it's over 1 million acres. Coillte are the biggest landowner in Ireland. They're the largest supplier of wood. And we want to manage our forests for wood, for climate, for nature and people. And you'll hear me say a bit about that as well. And we've an open forest policy, which means people are free to come and visit and walk in the forest. So we've been managed. Coillte was set up in 1989 by the government. So that is 35 years ago. And about 2 years ago, we had a good long look and said, right, how do we manage our forests and what do people want? So we asked people, did a national survey, and the results were, it wouldn't surprise you guys, that people are worried about global warming, that biodiversity and nature is really important, that we want more trees, and that Coillte should do more to help with climate change. So they're the kind of results that people told us what we should do. Here's my UN SDG slide just for Antonia. So we looked at what forests can do and deliver, and we tried to match them against the UN sustainability goals. So forests help with climate change mitigation, with water and soil protection. They provide habitats for nature and wildlife, produce sustainable products, help us with our health and well-being, and support the rural economy and jobs. And I try to match them to some of the SDGs, and Antonia can tell me if I have that right or wrong. We can talk about that later, possibly. So, as I said, nowadays our plan is to manage our forests for climate, for nature, for wood, and for people, to balance the main 4 benefits of forests. We believe forests can help with climate change. We believe they're really important for nature and wildlife. That's what I'm going to talk about mostly today. They'll supply wood for us as well, and that's controversial. So please ask any questions if you think cutting down a tree is a bad thing. If you cut down the tree and replant it again, is that okay? Let's have a chat about that if we like. That's always worth talking about. And for people, great places for people to visit. We know that forests we feel better when we take a walk. If you walk the dog around the block, my dog Lola's sitting here right here beside me. If you take a walk around the block, you probably feel a bit better. But if you walk in nature, then there's good evidence to say that if you take a walk in a forest or by the ocean, that it can help your mood and your well-being. So you'll feel better physically and you'll feel better emotionally as well. So we want to do more with our forests for climate, for nature, for wood, and for people, and to do it in a balanced way. So that's the kind of what we're trying to do. So today we want to talk a good bit about forests for nature. We want to understand how important trees and forests are for wildlife as habitats and for wild species, what Coillte are doing and what we will be doing. So Coillte estate, as I said, we've about 1 million acres of land, and about 20% today, I'll say a little bit more about that now, 1/5 of all of Coiltte's lands are managed primarily for nature. So that's 90,000 hectares. By my estimations, it's bigger than all the national parks put together. And the habitats that Coillte manage for nature is a split between forest habitat and open habitat, like open bogs and open heaths and open uplands. So the 20% that we manage for nature, ecologists give it management plans and we work very carefully with it. But the other 80%, the ecologists also help us manage that as well. So we're very careful how we work with nature across the entire estate. But for now, and it's going to get bigger, you'll see in a minute, that 20% we're managing very sensitively for nature. And that's because there are areas like this. These are areas that Coillte own and manage that ecologists, so experts in nature and wildlife, have told us are very important for nature. They're telling us these are areas you got to protect, you got to enhance, and they might need some management on them. So you're looking at, like, if you think of Coillte, you say, well, you guys are the forest. So there's nice oak forests and beech forests. Interestingly, beech did not arrive in Ireland until well after the last ice age. So in theory, if people know the beech tree, it would be considered non-native. But we got to ask the question, I guess, with climate change and with species moving, would trees like beech, would they have arrived in Ireland naturally? Would the seeds have been carried from the continent across England into Ireland if humans weren't here? My guess is it probably would have. But strictly speaking, it doesn't meet the native species rule. But that said, if you look at this picture here, the veteran beech in Portumna, one veteran tree like that is a fantastic habitat within a forest. So it's almost like a forest of habitats within a forest. And because a lot of our trees were cut down in Ireland, we don't have many of these big old trees. So even though it's non-native, it becomes a fantastic habitat for bats. They'll make summer roosts in it. They'll live in there. Squirrels will make their nests in there. Birds, fungi will grow in it. And trees, smaller trees, and believe it or not, will grow on that big tree. And little plants will grow on the tree called epiphytes. So plants that grow on plants. So they're really important features for nature. And then we have the open habitats. You can see at the bottom, Pow Laguna in County Clare. It's a blanket bog habitat and a wonderful forest. If anyone lives in Galway near Clonbur, I couldn't recommend enough to visit there. That's a fantastic place if you get a chance to visit there. So biodiversity challenges, it's all gravy so far. It's all been really good, but it's not really. We know that nature needs a hand. Ireland declared a biodiversity emergency and a climate crisis. So we know that things are bad and we got to work hard to make them better. So what are the challenges and what are we doing? A lot of our forests suffer from invasive species. That's up here. You can see two people working away, clearing it out. So species like rhododendron, Japanese knotwood, and cherry laurel, they'll grow in the forest. If they get established and they grow really quickly, they shade out all the light, they climb up and they take over. So they're non-native species. They totally take over the entire forest and they reduce all of the biodiversity. So no plants can grow on the forest floor. There's no room for birds or animals. So they're really problematic and they're really hard to get rid of as well. The minute you cut them back, they jump back out of the ground again because they're really good at growing. So that's a real challenge for us. Some of our forests are in the uplands and they're areas that are important for iconic species. That bird you can see there with the white, if anyone wants to have a guess in the chat box what they think it might be, this beautiful bird, he's white, it's a male, I'll give you a hint there, and it's got black wingtips. The female is ground nesting, so she lives in heather, so she's brown and looks totally different. And for years, people thought they were a different species. And the male catches prey, he catches little mice and voles and shrews, and he flies up in the air and he throws them up in the air, and the female flies up and catches them. So they do this prey passing, and when the male wants to attract a female, he does this wonderful display called sky dance, and the bird is sometimes called a sky dancer. So if anyone hasn't guessed, it's a hen harrier, and their numbers have gone down recently. Interestingly, their numbers went down really, really low in the 1950s, and they almost were lost from Ireland. And then with more forests being planted, their numbers went up again. So they did a really big recovery. And over the last 15 years or 20 years, their numbers are going down again. So we need to design our forests better for species like hen harrier to make sure they have the habitat that they need to grow and produce young. So that's a challenge for us. Deer are, we all love Bambi. He's a beautiful animal. We see them in the zoo. You see them in the Phoenix Park if you're in Dublin. You see them in Farron Forest Park if you're in Cork. And they're beautiful animals. But in Ireland, they have no predators. So they live wild in the countryside. There's no wolves. There's no lynx. There's no big cats to hunt them. And as a result, their numbers get bigger and bigger and bigger. So they graze everything that they can find. And of course they do, because they're hungry. So that means it's a problem to regenerate your forest. So young trees that would grow on the forest floor, these hungry deer are eating them up. So deer management is a real issue that we need to manage as well. That's a big veteran tree in the top left. I spoke a bit about those. That's a big veteran oak tree, which is a beautiful feature. There's an animal called the freshwater pearl mussel. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's probably Ireland's longest living animal. So it can live to well over 100 years old. It's like a mussel that you might see on your tea if you have mussels during the summertime. And they have a pearl in the middle. It's not the Middle Ages, before that, when Julius Caesar came to England, one of the British chieftains gave him a waistcoat made of pearls from the freshwater pearl mussel. And everyone thought that was great. So from that day onwards, people hunted pearl mussel to get the pearl out of them. And that's led to a serious decline in them. They require the highest water quality to survive. So their numbers have been going down. But if we can restore the pearl mussel, if the pearl mussel can become healthy, it's a real indicator species. If we have a healthy pearl mussel, that means the water, the river water, is really clean and really healthy. It means there's a lot of fish there. They need fish to complete their life cycle. So it's a key indicator species. If we can get things right for the pearl mussel, we're doing lots of things right as well. I'll say a little bit more about peatlands further on. So there's some of the challenges that we have to face, but we're ready to take them on. So how do ecologists do it? Or if Coillte have 90,000 hectares of biodiversity, and it's hard to kind of put that in perspective. It's 90,000 football pitches. It's a huge area. It's probably nearly as big as County Carlow, the whole county. How do you decide where will we manage for biodiversity? How will we spend the budget we have? What will we do with it? So before you can manage anything, it's good to measure it and to know what you have. So in Coillte, we have a system called BioClass. We classify the biodiversity areas that we have. And number one is the best, outstanding biodiversity. So it's hard for us to think sometimes in Ireland. We just think, oh, we're poor old Ireland. But we have some of the best forests and best peatlands on the planet. We have internationally important habitats that don't occur anywhere else in the world, and they're outstanding, and they need to be protected, and we've got to get really active to do that. So those habitats that we have, BioClass 1, they're outstanding. They're internationally important. BioClass 2, they're excellent habitats. They're really, really good. So they're kind of nationally important habitats. BioClass 3, they're really good. They're nice. And BioClass 4, they're moderate. They're nice to have, but we have them right around the country. So if you're an ecologist working, you might say, I have a budget. Where can I work? I have a BioClass 2 site. It's amazing. But if I remove that rhododendron, if I can block some of the drains, or if I can reduce grazing, that might become a BioClass 1. I might move it from excellent to outstanding. So that's a really good place to focus your management on. And that's kind of how we're doing it in Coillte. I could say loads about that, but clearly I won't. So here's a couple of beautiful sites. In County Mayo, there's a beautiful blanket bog there in Derry. So we've taken trees off that. In the past, we planted trees in areas that we know now are important for nature. So our peat bogs are really important. They also store carbon. They do it much more slowly, but they do it over thousands and thousands of years. And in some places in the 1980s and 1990s in the last century, foresters, for good reasons in some cases, particularly to keep men and women working in rural Ireland, would have drained some of these peat bogs and put trees on them. So today we know we would never do that. So we're identified peat bogs that we can restore, block up those small forestry drains, take the trees out and let the bog recover. And we've had really good success doing that in some really important bogs. There's a beautiful oak forest in County Wicklow, and there's a lovely forest on limestone pavement in County Galway. A really rare habitat, one of the Ireland and Sweden are probably the best examples. Limestone is called a karst landscape, and Ireland and Sweden probably have the best examples of this on planet Earth. So in the Burren, people might have heard the Burren in County Clare. If you haven't been there, go there in your holidays next year for a week and have a look at all the wild plants and animals. It's magic. And some of the forests there as well. They're really amazing places to visit. So we're actively restoring some of these really important forests as well. Just really to show you how it's done sometimes. In the top left, that's continuous cover forestry. So if you woodland you want to restore for nature, you'll take trees out individually. The bottom left is an old building, and there's an important bat roost in it. The bottom is an ecologist training foresters how to manage their forest for nature. That's a pine marten on the top, if people don't know what it is. The Irish for pine marten is Cot Crean tree cat, and you can see why Irish people call it a tree cat. The pine marten has made a marvellous recovery in the last 20 years. So 20 years ago, the pine marten was only in County Clare and County Limerick and maybe a little bit of County Galway. So a very limited distribution. It also had a stronghold in Fermanagh in the north. But if you want to see pine marten, you had to go to those places, hide in the woods, and hope against hope that you'd be lucky enough to see one. With the increase in forest cover in the last 20 years, pine marten has made a massive increase. It's now found in every county in Ireland, and mostly a lot of forests as well. And interestingly, you'll probably know, I'll tell you this story about the different types of squirrels we have in Ireland. If you know the two types of squirrels we have, put them in the chat box. You know them by the colours that they have. One is grey and one is red. And the Irish squirrel is red, and the English squirrel, or the American squirrel, excuse me, is grey. It's introduced, it's non-native, and it's invasive. The grey squirrel was brought in as a wedding present in County Longford in the 20s, I think. A couple were getting married in County Longford, and someone thought it'd be a good idea. They brought a basket of grey squirrels, and when the couple got married, they opened the basket. The grey squirrels hopped out and ran into the forest, and everyone clapped and said, "Wasn't that lovely?" And those handful of grey squirrels every grey squirrel we have in Ireland is a descendant of those grey squirrels. And 20 years ago, we thought the red squirrel would go extinct in Ireland because of that. What happens is the grey moves into the forest. It's able to eat acorns and nuts before they fully ripen. So the red squirrel has to wait until the nuts ripen before it can eat it. So the grey squirrel would come in and eat all the red squirrel's food. So it would have to move and try in different forests. Grey squirrel is quite aggressive as well. It pushes out the red squirrel, chases it out of the forest. So, as I said, 20 years ago, there was no red squirrel really east of the Shannon. There was Portumna in County Galway. We actually moved red squirrels from Portumna in County Galway to Balleek in County Mayo because we thought it might be the last population of red squirrel in Ireland and we were trying to protect it. What happened then, the pine marten arrived, and the pine marten and the red squirrel have grown up together over hundreds of years and centuries, and the red squirrel knows to be careful of the pine marten and stays away from it. But the grey squirrel didn't know that. So the pine marten came into the forest and hunted the grey squirrel, chased it out. So since the pine marten numbers have increased, grey squirrel numbers have gone right back down again. And the red squirrel is making a fantastic comeback across the country as well. So it's nature kind of rebalancing its way a little bit and getting its revenge for one unusual wedding over 100 years ago in Ireland. So that's the story, the pine marten, the grey squirrel and the red squirrel. On the bottom right, I'll stop talking about species now, but just can't help myself. There's an animal called the hairy wood ant. It's found in forests in Ireland. It's an Irish endemic species. So you find wood ants all over the world. But the hairy wood ant in Ireland behaves very differently and uniquely to any other ant anywhere on the planet. So it's a unique variant of a species that's found nowhere else in the world. It's a really vibrant species. They make those beautiful nests. You can see them there that are half the same height as yourself. They've really intricate structures and complex relationships. So it's really clearly an animal we have to protect because it's found nowhere else on the planet. So they're the kind of interesting animals and plants we'll find in our forests. Mindful of time. So I've mentioned, what are we going to do about nature and all these lovely plants and animals that we have? So today we managed 20% for nature. By next year, by the end of 2025, that's going to be 30%. And that's a massive big jump. It seems like only 10%, but it's another 44,000 hectares that's going to be managed for nature and biodiversity. And in the long term, our plan is to create enough new habitats through forest redesign so that 50% of all our forests will be managed primarily for nature. So we want to balance how we produce wood, how we help with climate change, how we attract people into the forest by moving to half of our forests for nature and half of our forests for wood and climate and people. And I'd be interested to see what people think. Is that too much? Is it not enough? What do you think? I'd be very interested to know what you think about that. So very quickly, there's another branch of Coillte called Coillte Nature. And Coillte Nature does big nature conservation projects. So that takes on large areas. So the Dublin Mountains is a good example. Those forests were planted in the Dublin Mountains in the 1950s and the 1960s, primarily to produce wood. Back then, the Dublin Mountains were a bit of a wilderness. There was no houses up there. Very few people went up. So the foresters said, this is a good place to grow forests for wood. But as Dublin got bigger and bigger and the city reached out to the mountains, more and more people went walking in those forests and really enjoyed it. So we had to say, right, these forests are really important for people now. So we've changed our management there. We're moving away from primarily wood producing. When we fell trees there, we're replanting with native tree species to increase the nature and biodiversity value of the forest, and we're increasing the recreation value. So the Dublin Mountains will regenerate an urban forest for the benefit of people and nature, but it can still supply wood to build low carbon houses, which are important as well. As we all know, I'll say that when I say about wood. So that's Coillte Nature. So really quickly, what are we doing? I've spoken a lot there about what Coillte are doing for nature. And really quickly, I'll say a little bit about climate and wood and people, but just a slide or two in each. So for climate, we all know that trees are really important. They sink carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as they grow. They remove the main gas responsible for climate change. And as they absorb that gas, they produce pure oxygen. It's that old joke that if we could invent a machine that absorbed carbon dioxide from the air and produce pure oxygen in return, we'd win the Nobel Prize for climate change. And that machine is a tree. So the more trees we have, the more we can help with climate change. So they sink it in from the atmosphere and then they store it within the tree themselves, in their wood, in their branches, in their leaves. If we use that wood carefully, if we use it to build a house, that carbon that was stored by the tree will be locked away again by hundreds of years. And if we manage the forest really well and replant immediately after we felled, we start that carbon cycle again. We all know, well, I'll say a bit about that in wood. So that's the carbon benefits of trees. I mentioned a little bit of peatlands as well. So if you drain a peatland, it can become a source of carbon, and a well-managed peatland should be a sink of carbon. And what we want to do with some of our peatlands, we've identified 30,000 hectares that we're going to completely re-wet or rewild, or some, that's the 30,000. Some peatlands where the peat is shallow are really productive for trees, so we might replant them with native broadleaves or with conifers. So wood, what do we use our wood for? Why do we cut trees for wood and replant them? So the wood, if you were sitting in your home or in your school, if you went up in the attic, for example, you'll look at the roof is held up by wood. The floor might be made of wood. The table that you're sitting at might be made of wood. So it's really important that we, one, know where our wood comes from, that it comes from well-managed forests. We don't want it coming from logged old growth forests. We all know there's a housing crisis. So every government party says we've got to build more houses. And I'd love them to say, what should we build them from? Shouldn't we build more houses made of wood that will help us with climate change? For every ton of building material we use, there's a report to say for every cubic meter, ton of timber we use for housing, we absorb nearly 3/4 of a ton of carbon back. So it's much more carbon efficient and climate efficient. I put on a kitchen extension on my house in Ballymun here about 5 years ago. I built it out of wood and we built it in about 3 days. It's really quick. It's really carbon efficient. So that old little pig story that, you know, the house built of wood will blow down isn't true. So we need more timber housed in Ireland. If we do, where should we get that timber from? Should we grow it here ourselves and manage it sustainably for nature and people and climate? I think we should, but equally, we've got to be very careful that we protect biodiversity. So that's wood. And then people, said a bit about forests for people. They're really nice places to visit, the forests. People in Dublin have the Dublin Mountains, the Slieve Blooms in the Midlands, the Slieve Aughties in the west, the Ballyhowers in the south. Coillte have 250 recreational forests. So there's 3 or 4 in every county in Ireland. There's a forest. If you go to Coilte's website, coillte.ie, there's a map there. It says visit our forest. You can see your nearest recreation forest, and there'll be trails in there, or mountain bike trails. That big wooden tower is beyond the trees, Avondale. We've opened that 2 years ago. It's been a great success. So we have 250 recreation forests, and we want to double that number. We want to make that 500, and we're looking at a forest that are close to towns and villages, so that people who work hard or you might get stressed can take a walk under the trees and with nature and relax and reconnect. So that's essentially what we're trying to do. For Coillte, we think it's about the right tree in the right place for the right objective, or the right objective. If you want a tree for wood, where do you plant it? In the right place with the right tree. And we want to balance nature, climate, people, and wood. And that's what we're trying to do. So that's where I'm going to stop there. I'll stop sharing now. And if there's any questions, shout, or I can ask if there's any questions there. Did any come through to you by the chat? I know it's like not fun to. Oh, there's a couple of questions I see there. Yeah. Where does the pearl mussel live? Oh, slides are great, but so fast. Sorry, Paula. I didn't want to keep you. I didn't want to keep people too long. So sorry about going too quickly. Yes, you can get access to them. I'll give them to Antonia. Absolutely delighted to share them with you. The pearl mussel lives. It's interesting. The pearl mussel was an animal that was found all across Europe. Today, 95% of the world's population of pearl mussel occur in Scotland and in Ireland. So it's a species that's nearly gone extinct globally, and nearly all the remnant populations live in Scotland and Ireland. Interestingly, their populations are usually found near forests, and that's often because if trees are planted, they're let to grow, and we move away from those areas. There's no one in them, so it's nice and quiet and safe and clean for them. They live really, really long lives, so they live about well over 100 years, and they to reproduce, they have a really complicated but fun life cycle. So they produce tiny little larvae in the water called Glaucidia, and they swim from the pearl mussel upstream. So you can imagine a mussel is like a shell, can't really go walking through the forest. So they produce these tiny little larvae, and it swims upstream, and it has to find a salmon or a trout that's swimming upstream, and then it jumps into the gill of the fish and hangs onto the fish, and it kind of takes a little joyride from the fish right the way back upstream again, and then it hops off the fish, gets into the sediment, and grows into a pearl mussel. So that's how they move upstream. They hitch a lift on the salmon and trout. So they have to make sure that they release their little larvae exactly the same time that the fish are in the river. The water quality has to be really clean because they're really sensitive. So when the larvae lands in this gravel bed, if there's sediment or nutrients that are coming from pollution, the gravel bed won't have the oxygen in it needs to live, so they're very vulnerable. The old animals are really robust, and what's sad for a lot of populations of pearl mussel is you can see really old animals right up to, say, born in the 1970s, and no new animals from there. So the water quality, the adult is quite tolerant, but the young need really clean water. So you can actually see a species slowly going extinct if we're not careful. What are we doing about it? Loads. So where we know where the pearl mussel is, we fell the trees really carefully back from the river's edge, and we don't plant within 50 meters either side of the riverbed. We keep clean from big trees. We'll plant some native woodlands for shade. We'll block any drains running in, and we try and restore the river's ecology to help them. So that's pearl mussel. I see roadworks between Newport and Westport were held up for pearl mussel. That's right. That was very controversial. A bridge came down, and people went into work straight away, and they didn't put any plans in to help the pearl mussel, so they were stopped for ages and ages. And in Ireland, sometimes we should have been quicker to put the plan in to help the pearl mussel and to rebuild the bridge. So this is a bit like forestry. You have to have nature and people and climate and potentially wood. So if we pick one out of balance, then things are bad, and that can happen. So that's pearl mussel. Am I missing any other questions, Antonia?
No, I just have one. What do you think is like a quick, simple way that like communities or schools or anyone can try to increase their biodiversity within their area, or like I guess, should they look at maybe specific animals within that area that they could try target and have a
Yeah, that's
knock-on effect?
It's a really good question. So, and a really important question, Antonia, because we hear all the time climate change is happening. We can't turn it back. It's really bad. So, especially for young people, they're saying, oh, our whole future is being cut short because you old guys here have ruined the planet. So, what do we do about it? And it's important to take positive steps because if we feel nothing can be done, that climate anxiety is real and we need to do something about it. And doing positive things locally can really help. One thing I would highly recommend in March every year is National Tree Week. Coillte give about 150,000 at least trees to communities and schools all over the country. Have a look at our website in the run into March so you can get trees and plant them in your local area. So the trees are free. You get them. They're all native trees. You can plant them. So even planting one tree, one single tree, if you've room in the garden, if you don't have room in the garden and you live in an apartment or a flat or a tiny house, plant a tree in a pot. It can't get really big because it lives in the pot, but that tree will start doing what trees do. It will start absorbing carbon dioxide. It will start helping to clean the atmosphere, even that one little tree in the pot. So I would say more trees are better. And if you plant trees in the outside and the native trees, if there's a quiet corner of your garden or the neighborhood, or if communities come together, there's a green area in the village that doesn't have trees. If you plant trees there, what will happen is insects will arrive. So you'll get green fly will come and go, yummy, there's leaves to eat. So green fly will arrive. And then ladybirds will say, yummy, we love to eat green fly. So the ladybirds will arrive to eat the green fly. And then blackbirds and other birds, tree creepers and other small birds will arrive to eat those insects. So by simply planting those trees, you've made a fantastic habitat to attract nature into your area. And you're helping with climate change as well. And also, when people plant the trees and visit them over time, you're going to help with your own well-being as well. So keep an eye out for Tree Week. It happens in week 3 of month 3 every year, Tree Week. So that'll happen in March next year. Actually, October the 3rd next week is Tree Day. So there'll be a few events going. But the big tree giveaway is every week, every year in March is Tree Week. So I would say get involved then. Another way you can get involved as well, for schools all around the country, if you have a Coillte forest nearby, go and visit it, take a walk in it, send us an email, info@coillte.ie, find out, is it managed for nature or for wood or for climate, what the plans are. Could it be one of Coiltte's new recreational forests? Could you get trails put in there as near a village? Could there be furniture put? Could you get a bird table put in? All those little things. Even those things are magic, Antonia. If for people living in towns, even putting a bird table in your back garden, I think is fantastic. Put some feed out. It helps small birds survive the winter that might otherwise not survive. They have the food and energy they need. And then you've helped those species get through the winter. You're making the world more biodiverse.
Yeah, that's perfect. I think it's just because sometimes it can be quite daunting to see where to start, or
it can.
You're constantly getting told this is happening, but it's also really good for your mental health to get out into nature. So having nature on your doorstep. But living in cities, we don't have many green spaces, so it can be quite hard. But yeah, I think that was so good. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. There's always a communal green space somewhere. Even in a city, there's a small green space. And usually, unfortunately, there's no trees on it. So let's try and get some trees in those places. That'll be a start. Even if you live in the city, maybe the weekend, I know the nights are getting shorter, take a drive to your nearest Coillte forest and take a walk in them, and you'll feel better for it. And even a little bird table in your back garden would be fabulous. Buy some bird seed, put it out and watch the birds come. Particularly now as we come into the winter, it's a really good time to start feeding birds. You can put a little poster on your wall and tick the different type of birds that come into your garden. I've 2 or 3 here and I'm always amazed by the birds that show up. So, but it's a really important message. We can feel like there's such bad news out there, and there is bad news. I'm not going to lie, there is a biodiversity crisis. There is a climate emergency. We need to do more. We've only 11% forest cover in Ireland. In Europe, the average is 40%. So I would think we need a lot more trees in Ireland, well-managed trees. And that will mean, controversially, you guys can discuss this in your own time, should we cut down any trees? If we don't, how do we build low-carbon buildings? And if we do, how do we do it sustainably and responsibly? And they're the challenges we can take on and manage as well as we possibly can.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much. I think it's probably given people a lot to think about.
That's great.
So that is all that matters. It's a stepping stone and seeing where we can go, and even visiting Coillte forests. I know I do them because I live in Dublin, so the Dublin Mountains are very accessible for me. And like even during COVID and stuff like that, it was very easy and very nice to go to somewhere was within my area and that I could get away to, basically. So, well, thank you. And
thanks, Antonia, and thanks everyone for listening. I hope I didn't go over time. Sorry for going through the slides so quickly, but if I spent ages on them, we'd be here for another hour, and it's definitely time for the cup of tea. Really, really nice to meet you all this morning. I really hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I'll talk to you guys next year again. Thanks, Antonia. Really nice to meet you. We'll talk later on this afternoon anyway.
Yeah, I'm just going to run through a tiny bit. If you guys do want to get involved with ECO-UNESCO, I'm sure some of you have seen these, but you can do the Young Environmentalist Awards. That's with myself. Our workshops can come to the school, or they can be online. Just get in contact with them at bookings at ECO-UNESCO. And then our youth groups. So anyone who does want to take that next step, we have our Youth for Sustainable Development groups. So that's Maynooth, Galway, Drogheda and Dublin in person. And then they're also online. And then our Youth Climate Justice. So there's like advocating and lobbying against all these problems that are going on. And then quickly, if you guys did have any feedback, I've popped it in the chat. So I've just pinned it. If you could give us any feedback, that'd be amazing. And thank you all so much. Enjoy your day. And I hope we'll see you sometime during the rest of the week. So this is what we have going on for the rest of the week. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Pat. And enjoy your day, guys.
Thanks, Antonia. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thanks. Bye.